Some of history's most legendary figures lived and died long before the modern world ever began, or so we think. But a few of them survived just long enough to do something you wouldn't expect: get photographed. These rare images captured faces from a time we can barely imagine, and the stories behind them are even more unbelievable. Join us as we reveal the oldest historical figures that lived long enough to be photographed. John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams was born in 1767, right at the heart of America's founding years. He was the son of John Adams, who would later become the second president of the United States. From the beginning, John Quincy was surrounded by the ideas and events that would shape the birth of a new country. But what made his life truly special was not just being born into a famous family. It was how long he lived and how much he did for his country over those many years. As a child, John Quincy Adams got to see history being made up close. While most kids his age were learning how to read and write, he was sailing across the Atlantic Ocean with his father on dangerous diplomatic missions. He traveled to France and the Netherlands during times of war when ships could be attacked by enemy forces. He didn't just travel, he listened, watched, and learned. These early experiences taught him about diplomacy and politics at a very young age. He learned multiple languages and grew up with a strong sense of public duty. As an adult, Adams became a highly skilled diplomat. He served as a U.S. ambassador in several important countries, including the Netherlands, Prussia, Russia, and Britain. This was during a time when Europe was going through major changes, especially after the defeat of Napoleon. One of his most important achievements was helping to negotiate the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, which ended the War of 1812 between the United States and Britain. That was a major accomplishment, and it helped bring peace at a time when war could have torn the young country apart. In 1825, John Quincy Adams became the 6th President of the United States. But his election was unusual. It was decided by the House of Representatives after no candidate won a majority of electoral votes. During his presidency, Adams focused on improving the country through science, education, and infrastructure. He supported the creation of a national observatory, better roads, and public universities. He believed the government had a responsibility to help improve people's lives. However, many people in Congress didn't agree with his ideas. His time in office was constantly challenged by political opponents, and he struggled to get his plans approved. Because of this, his presidency was seen as difficult and frustrating. What makes Adams truly unique is what he did after leaving the White House. Instead of retiring like most presidents, he ran for Congress and won. From 1830 until his death in 1848, Adams served as a representative in the House. He became one of the most powerful voices against slavery. At a time when speaking out against slavery was extremely unpopular in parts of the country, Adams took a strong stand. In 1848, while giving a speech in the Capitol, Adams collapsed. He died 2 days later, still serving the country he had spent his entire life helping to shape. He was 80 years old. A few years before his death in 1843, John Quincy Adams had his photograph taken. It's the earliest known photo of any U.S. president. That image shows a man who had lived through the American Revolution, helped lead the country as it grew, and stood firm for justice even in his old age. His face in that photo connects two very different Americas, one just being born and one heading toward the Civil War. Next up is someone who may have been the earliest born person ever photographed, and her story is just as wild. Hannah Stilly Gorby. Hannah Stilly. Gorby may be one of the oldest people ever captured in a photograph. Born around the year 1746, she came into the world nearly 30 years before the United States even existed. This was a time when the American colonies were still under British rule. There was no Declaration of Independence, no United States Constitution, and no idea yet of a country called America as we know it today. Hannah would have grown up in a small colonial settlement. Most people lived simple, hard lives. Everything was done by hand. Families raised their own food, made their own clothes, and worked from sunrise to sunset. There were no cars or trains. People traveled by foot, horse, or wagon. Roads were rough, and many areas were completely wild. As she grew older, Hannah likely witnessed or heard about the rising tension between the colonies and the British Crown. The Stamp Act, the Boston Tea Party, and other major events that led to the American Revolution would have taken place while she was in her 20s or 30s. She was alive during the war that gave birth to the United States. By the time the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, Hannah was already 30 years old. She lived through the birth of a new nation. But her story didn't stop there. She lived long enough to see America grow from 13 colonies into a larger republic. During her lifetime, the country added new states, built new cities, and began creating a national identity. She also lived during one of the most important times in world history, a period filled with revolutions, wars, and change. She saw the effects of the French Revolution in Europe and the rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. What's truly amazing is that Hannah was likely born before the steam engine was widely used, but she was photographed after the invention of the camera. Photography was brand new when she was alive. The earliest photos in history were taken in the 1830s and 1840s. Cameras were large, expensive, and rare. Only a few people in the world had them. For a woman born in 1746 to be captured in a photo is something truly rare and historic. We don't know much about her personal life. Records from that time are often limited or lost. But we do know she lived through very hard times. Life in the 1700s and early 1800s was full of danger. Medical care was poor. Many people died from diseases that are now easily treated. Childbirth was risky, especially for women. Food shortages, cold winters, and poor living conditions made life difficult. Living to an old age like Hannah did was rare. She lived through wars, political changes, and new technologies. She saw the country change in ways no one could have imagined when she was young. And then, just before her death, someone took her photograph. That photo is like a time machine. It captures a person who lived in the age of powdered wigs, handwritten letters, and horse-drawn wagons, preserved forever using a 19th century invention: Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was born in 1856 in the small village of Smiljan, which at the time was part of the Austrian Empire. Today it's located in modern-day Croatia. He was born into a Serbian Orthodox family. His father was a priest and writer, and his mother, although not formally educated, was known for inventing simple household tools. Tesla always credited her as the source of his inventive spirit. His early years were spent in a world still lit by oil lamps and powered by steam. There was no electricity in homes. Scientific discoveries were starting to change daily life, but the world Tesla entered was still mostly pre-industrial. Tesla's mind was unusual from a young age. He had an incredible memory and claimed to be able to visualize machines completely in his head before ever building them. He studied engineering and physics in Austria and Prague, but he never graduated. Even so, he absorbed knowledge rapidly and showed signs of brilliance early on. However, he also suffered from emotional strain. He experienced mental exhaustion, struggled with strong phobias, and often fell into obsessive routines. These challenges followed him throughout his life. In 1884, Tesla moved to the United States, arriving in New York City with only a few cents in his pocket. He brought with him a letter of introduction to Thomas Edison. At first, Tesla worked for Edison, but the two had very different ideas. Edison supported direct current, while Tesla believed alternating current was the future. Their disagreement led to a break, and Tesla eventually joined forces with inventor and businessman George Westinghouse. Together, they promoted AC power, which eventually became the world standard for electricity. Tesla's ideas won the so-called War of Currents. Tesla was responsible for some of the most important inventions of his time. He developed the Tesla coil, AC motors, transformers, and ideas that helped lay the groundwork for wireless communication. He had a vision of a connected world long before anyone else. In fact, as early as 1901, he predicted global wireless communication, something we now live with every day. He was also behind early versions of radio, remote controls, and X-ray technology. At the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, his system lit up the event, showing the power of AC electricity to the world. Soon after, he helped build the first major hydroelectric plant at Niagara Falls. Tesla was photographed many times in his life. In the 1890s, he appeared confident and stylish, the image of a modern inventor. But in later years, photos show a thinner, tired man, often alone. His eyes, however, always seemed sharp, focused, and filled with ideas. These photographs give us a rare look at a man who witnessed the world shift from candles and steam to electric light and wireless signals. Tesla's life was one of imagination, struggle, and lasting impact. Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was born around 1822 in Maryland into a life of slavery. Her birth name was Araminta Ross, but she later changed it to Harriet in honor of her mother. From childhood, Harriet was forced to work in the fields and in the homes of slaveholders. She was often beaten and treated with cruelty. Like many enslaved people, she had no control over her own life. Her family could be separated at any time, and she had no legal rights. When she was just 13 years old, Harriet suffered a serious head injury. An overseer threw a heavy metal weight at another enslaved person, but it hit Harriet instead. The injury fractured her skull and caused her to have seizures, dizziness, and visions for the rest of her life. Many people later said that these visions gave her a deep spiritual strength. Though she lived with pain and disability, she never let it stop her. In 1849, Harriet escaped from slavery. She made her way to the north, traveling by night and hiding during the day. Most people would have stopped there, happy to have reached safety. But Harriet couldn't forget those she left behind. She returned to the South again and again, risking her life to guide others to freedom. Over a span of about 10 years, she made at least 19 trips and helped free more than 70 enslaved people. She used a network called the Underground Railroad, a secret system of safe houses and supporters. Slaveholders placed large rewards on her head. Armed patrols searched for her, but Harriet was never caught. When the Civil War began in 1861, Harriet didn't stay on the sidelines. She joined the Union cause. She worked as a nurse caring for wounded soldiers. She also served as a scout and a spy. Her deep knowledge of Southern territory made her a valuable guide. In 1863, she became the first woman to lead a U.S. military operation. The Combahee River Raid, which she helped plan and carry out, freed more than 700 enslaved people in South Carolina. This mission was a major success and showed Harriet's skill as a military leader. After the war, Harriet continued to fight, not on battlefields but in public life. She spoke out for the rights of black soldiers who had not been paid fairly. She joined the movement for women's suffrage, believing strongly that women deserved the right to vote. Though she was praised by many, she received very little financial help. The U.S. government delayed and reduced her pension for her military work. She struggled with money for most of her life. The photo of Harriet Tubman taken in 1911 shows her as an elderly woman. She was physically weak by then, likely in her late 80s or early 90s, but her expression is strong and calm. Her face tells the story of a lifetime spent in danger, service, and sacrifice. She is one of the last people in history who lived through slavery and fought it with her own hands. That photograph is not just a portrait. It is a rare and powerful image of living resistance and courage. Up next is a man whose sharp mind and calm leadership helped decide the fate of Europe after Napoleon's rise, the Duke of Wellington. The Duke of Wellington, born Arthur Wellesley in 1769, came into the world during a time when kings ruled most of Europe and empires controlled huge parts of the globe. He was born into the British aristocracy and received a formal education. But what truly shaped his life was the military. He joined the army in the 1780s, and his career would take him across continents and through some of the most intense wars in European history. Wellington's first major combat experience was in India. The British Empire was expanding its control there, and it faced strong resistance from local rulers. He served in several dangerous campaigns. India's climate was harsh, very hot, humid, and full of diseases that killed many British soldiers. The fighting was brutal. Armies fought with muskets, swords, and bayonets. Supplies were hard to come by, and marches through unfamiliar terrain were long and exhausting. Wellington not only survived these conditions, but he also learned how to lead and win under pressure. His experience in India prepared him for an even greater challenge, the Napoleonic Wars. Beginning in 1808, Wellington took command of British forces in Spain and Portugal. This became known as the Peninsular War. At the time, Napoleon controlled most of Europe, and his armies were feared across the continent. Wellington had to work with local Spanish and Portuguese forces who didn't always trust each other or follow orders well. It was a hard situation. There were not enough supplies. Soldiers were often hungry, sick, and tired. But Wellington stayed calm, used smart tactics, and kept his army disciplined. Over 6 years of fighting, he slowly pushed the French forces out of the Iberian Peninsula. He defeated several of Napoleon's top marshals. His success in Spain showed that Napoleon's empire could be challenged and beaten. He became a hero across Europe, and his leadership gave hope to those who wanted to stop French domination. Then came the most famous moment of his life, the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. After Napoleon escaped exile and returned to power, many feared he would once again conquer Europe. Wellington was given the task of stopping him. On June 18, 1815, the two armies met in Belgium. It was one of the bloodiest and most important battles in history. The fighting was fierce and chaotic. Wellington later said it was the nearest run thing you ever saw in your life, meaning victory was almost lost. But thanks to his careful planning, strong defenses, and the arrival of Prussian reinforcements, Napoleon was finally defeated. The victory at Waterloo ended the Napoleonic Wars and changed Europe forever. In 1844, a photographer captured an image of Wellington. He was in his 70s at the time. The photograph shows a man who had seen more war, power, and pressure than most people could imagine. His face is lined, his eyes steady. This image is more than just a portrait. It is a link to a world of swords, cannons, and empires. It shows a man who helped decide the future of a continent. Now get ready to meet a man whose mind helped rewrite our understanding of life itself. Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was born in 1809 in England, during a time when science was starting to change how people understood the world. He came from a wealthy family and had access to a top education. His grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, was a respected thinker, and his father was a doctor. As a young man, Darwin first studied medicine, then theology, but he was always most interested in nature. At just 22 years old, Darwin joined a British scientific voyage aboard the HMS Beagle in 1831. The trip lasted 5 years and took him around the world. He visited places like South America, remote islands, and most famously, the Galapagos Islands. The journey was not easy. The ship sailed through dangerous storms, and Darwin often became seriously ill. He also caught tropical diseases and dealt with seasickness throughout the trip. Many people who went on these types of journeys died young, but Darwin made it through. Despite the hardships, the journey gave him something priceless, a new way to think about life on Earth. While observing animals, plants, and fossils during his travels, Darwin began to notice patterns. He saw that species seemed to adapt to their environments. On the Galapagos Islands, for example, he studied finches that had different beak shapes depending on what they ate. Slowly, he started forming a new idea, what would later be called evolution, through natural selection. Darwin knew that this idea would challenge what most people believed at the time. The church taught that all species were created exactly as they are. The idea that species could change and that humans shared common ancestors with other animals was shocking. Because of this, Darwin didn't publish his theory right away. He kept researching and thinking for over 20 years. Finally, in 1859, Darwin released On the Origin of Species. The book explained how life evolves over time. It became one of the most important scientific books ever written. The reaction was intense. Some scientists praised it, but many others, especially religious leaders, strongly attacked it. They said it went against the Bible and insulted human dignity. At the same time, Darwin was dealing with his own personal struggles. He had a mystery illness that lasted for most of his adult life. He suffered from nausea, fatigue, and anxiety. Modern experts still don't know exactly what caused it. Some believe the illness may have been made worse by stress. Darwin knew his ideas would cause trouble, and he worried about how they would affect his family, friends, and society. He was especially worried about hurting his deeply religious wife, Emma. The photo taken of Darwin in 1869 shows a man who had lived through physical pain, personal conflict, and public outrage, but who still stood firm in his work. His face looks tired, but also wise and thoughtful. That photo captures more than just a scientist. It shows someone who had changed how people see themselves and the world around them. Next up is a man who survived duels, wars, and even an assassination attempt. Let's talk about Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was born in 1767 in the backwoods of the Carolinas, just a few years before the American Revolution began. From the start, his life was shaped by war and hardship. During the Revolution, his family suffered deeply. His father died before he was born. His mother and both brothers died during the war, and Jackson was left an orphan at just 14. As a teenager, he was captured by British soldiers. When he refused to clean a British officer's boots, the officer slashed him across the face and hand with a sword. Jackson nearly died from smallpox while held as a prisoner of war. These early traumas left permanent physical and emotional scars and hardened him for the future. Jackson was a natural fighter. Throughout his adult life, he was involved in many duels, some over politics, others over personal insults. One of the most famous duels was against Charles Dickinson, a well-known marksman. Dickinson shot Jackson in the chest, the bullet lodging dangerously close to his heart. But Jackson stayed standing, took careful aim, and shot Dickinson dead. That bullet remained in Jackson's body for the rest of his life, along with others from earlier fights. Jackson became a national hero during the War of 1812. In 1815, he led American troops in the Battle of New Orleans, a major victory over British forces. The battle took place after the war had technically ended, but it was still seen as a major triumph. Jackson led his men while suffering from dysentery and malaria. He was so sick he could barely sit on a horse, but he refused to give up command. His strict discipline and courage inspired fierce loyalty among his troops, many of whom believed he was unstoppable. In 1829, Jackson became the 7th President of the United States. He was the first president from the American frontier and the first who wasn't born into wealth or elite society. His time in office was full of conflict. In 1835, he became the first president to face an assassination attempt. A man named Richard Lawrence tried to shoot him with 2 pistols. Both misfired. Jackson, then nearly 70 years old, reportedly attacked Lawrence with his cane until others pulled him away. In 1844 or 1845, just before his death, photographs were taken of Andrew Jackson. He was in his late 70s, frail and visibly aged, with deep scars on his face. His body was held together by decades of willpower and survival. These early photos give us a rare look at one of America's most battle-hardened figures: an orphan, a duelist, a war hero, and a president. If you enjoyed this look at the people behind the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a video like this one.